There we go. All right. So last time we talked about Rousseau's. We finished discussing Rousseau's argument for about the social contract. If you remember, Rousseau thinks that something like the Hegelian myth, as Tesson calls it, is true. It's not a myth; it's an actuality. So societies as a whole and states as a whole, collectives can be moral units. Can have rights, can have a real sense of freedom, they can have a type of consciousness even, they can have a will that's better as a group actually than the will of the individuals that make up that group, Rousseau thinks. And so when that happens, you get this public persona, right? And it literally means a public person for him. It's this creature, the unit, the collective that now has autonomy and all the rights that go with it. And to do that, you got to be self-determining as a group in a quite literal sense, right? So that's why Rousseau has this strong theory of democracy that goes with the social contract, because only in a democracy, he thinks, is the whole puzzle that he begins with solved, right? So he begins with this puzzle about people being born free, but everywhere in chains. How might that, the fact that we're restricted by the laws of our society, how might that be legitimate? His answer is, it's legitimate to be restricted by laws if and only if those laws are really representing your own will, if they're self-imposed. If you, as a subject to the law, are at the same time the giver of the law. So you're the receiver and the giver at the same time, and now you're free in that sense. Right? And so a self-determining country or a community has this moral value only if, Rousseau says, the people in it are equally giving the laws to themselves. And that's what makes the idea going. So self-determining in a very literal way, right? Every individual together as a group are working in producing the laws that are determining their own fate. But that requires democracy, right? Because only when we have a democracy can we say that this loop, right, where you're receiving and giving the laws at the same time, is happening for Rousseau. And so last time we talked about that little brief argument or tale that Nozick tells. Nozick raises some questions about this idea, right, whether democracy can really be said to be free, which was one thing that Rousseau claims for his type of democracy. And so today we're going to look at Altman and Wellman's arguments about democracy. And you see they try to pull apart the idea of self-determination and democracy. Right? So where for Rousseau these are part of the very same idea, in Altman and Wellman they come apart. So they say you can have self-determination without having democracy. All right. So far so good, right? All right. Before I start talking to Italian, can anyone give me, just in their own words, what you think, one of the arguments perhaps that Altman and Wellman give against democracy, or why self-determination and democracy aren't part of the same idea?
Democracy cannot be grounded into individual rights, but only to the collective right of the whole self-determination.
Yeah, say that again. Democracy can't
be the value of democracy or democratic value cannot be grounded in individual rights, but rather in the irreducibly collective right of self-determination.
Good. Right, so the value of democracy has to be grounded in self-determination. It's not a condition of self-determination for them, right? Okay, so but that's good. That's the conclusion, right? So why? Anthony?
I think what I read was that you don't have to have democracy just for like the people to live in like a place where their human rights can be protected. Like you can have a different forms of government where the people feel respected, and you don't have to have democracy just for like you got like a communist country per se, or like some other type of country where they still respect their citizens and the people aren't being hurt by the government.
Good, yes. So every country that has a real valid right to self-determination will have to respect human rights. And so it's going to be an important part of the argument that is possible without having a democracy. Right? Yeah. So one of the reading questions I asked you was, why does it matter to the argument that there is no human right to democracy? And that's your answer. Right? Because if there was a human right to democracy and you abolish democracy, then you thereby be violating human rights. And then that wouldn't work in their theory. Right? So, Claudia, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something, basically that they say that with self-determination, as long as it's legitimate, so you protect human rights and you have human rights, you can have any institutional arrangement you want.
Right.
But then exactly that if they have to protect human rights, and if human rights equals democracy, then that wouldn't work.
Right. You kind of get democracy in through the back door, right? Right. So that's why they block the human right to democracy. Yeah, we'll get back to that. So if we could just put it in like the simplest terms, right? Like not exam terms, but just sort of here, you tell me tell a friend, right? What do Altman and Wellman think self-determination is, or what is it about? Just in like a sentence or two. When a society or a group is self-determining, what is it doing?
It's going about its own way of governance while making sure that human rights are being protected and respected as well, and that among those human rights, democracy is not one of them.
Good, yeah. So even more spiffy, right? We can do. So you say like basic. So this should by now sort of roll off your tongue, right? Like self-determination for Altman and Wellman is a group settling or ordering its own affairs. There's more details and more subtleties and nuances and so on too, but that's the heart of the idea, right? So a group is self-determining when it's in charge of its own rules, its own affairs. It sets its own course. Now, of course, that's not an unlimited right, and this is where the human rights talk comes in, right? So there's, like all rights, there are limits to how you can exercise it, and so the self-determination is a right, Altman and Wellman say, but there are limits to it. What limits? Human rights. Those are the limits. But ultimately, it's this group settling its own affairs, deciding how it's going to be governed. All right. So why don't they see democracy as important to that? There is a spiffy answer to this too, if you. Yeah.
Do you mean like in reference to human rights? Because with human rights, they say that human rights for them is that you live a decent life, and living a decent life for them doesn't mean that you necessarily have a democracy. Democracy, they say that it does.
It helps, right?
Help
Yeah.
live a decent life, but to live a decent life without living a decent life.
Right. So they're very good. Yeah. So they say like they're very positive about democracy. They like democracies a lot, right? Say it's like your odds, your chances, probability of living a decent life is way bigger if you live in a democracy than outside of it. But it's not necessary, right? We can imagine, and we know of societies that aren't fully democratic in which you can still have a decent life. That's part of the argument. So if Rousseau says, well, but for like, okay, Altman and Wellman, self-determination is about a group ordering its own affairs, giving its own rules and laws, then it has to be democratic. What do you think they would reply? Reggie? Yeah, that's an important part of what they say, that democracies do have a... Yeah, so well, if I say self-determination... So let's not talk about human rights for a moment, okay? It'll help. If I say, I'm Rousseau, put my Rousseau hat on, right? I say, okay, Altman and Wellman, you say like self-determination is about a society, a group, ordering its own affairs. Well, then you must also think, Altman and Wellman, that that group that is self-determining must be democratic. Because in a democracy, people order their own affairs. So that's me saying Rousseau. Now Altman and Wellman come back, no, right? That's not right. That's a mistake. Why is that? What's the reason it's a mistake?
Well, they always refer to like having, for example, a referendum that you can by having like the democratic decision of having a, for example, monarchy, they still act, or they still have like a self-determination as a group, as a collective, but they decided to do that. But only with saying that this has to be like, there has to be a possibility to later on also decide if they don't want to
Go back, right. Yeah, good. Right, so they have this section called a right to forego democracy, right? And so that kind of that summarizes it, that's the spiffy provision, right? So the idea is that if a self-determination is a right, and that is a right to order your own affairs, that includes, they think, to order them in a non-democratic way. Right? So a monarchy could be it, you could have some type of council, an aristocratic way, you could have all sorts of ways. Clergy could be in charge, wherever, right? So that's fine, they say. So if you believe in the right to self-determination, it's not what Rousseau thinks that you have to have this really strong democratic, constant giving yourself the law for every individual law. But it can be sort of a more nebulous or more abstract way in which you give yourself. Like if as a group you decide to no longer do that, that's still consistent with or an exercise of the right to self-determination. If you have to choose so far between Rousseau ID and the Altman and Wellman ID, which one do you like better? Yeah? Any Rousseau partisans here? Think that democracy is more important? You want to give it a shot, Mike? Why do you like Rousseau? Just explain why you know? Mm-hmm. There's something attractive about it, right? Like this, if you think that self-determination really is the people deciding how they want to live together, then you might think that, well, like, okay, like 40 years ago, people maybe decided to abolish democracy, and it was their choice. But now I'm 26 or whatever, or I'm 37 actually, but 37. So 40 years is longer ago than I was born, and I have to live now under these monarchic rules. So in what sense am I determining the course? It was 40 years ago they determined this. I don't have to. So if you think that's an attractive, that makes sense, right? That I'm not really self-determining because I'm just getting these king's laws and I have to just put up with it because there's not a majority that wants to overthrow it or something. And if that threatens my being part of a self-determining group, and I'm not alone probably, right? If that threatens the group being self-determining, if you have that intuition, then you're going to be drawn to Rousseau's idea that democracy has to be part of it. Right? That I have to have some form of say in order for the group to be really determining its own. Because now, who's determining? Well, it's the king or the queen is determining. Right?
I think that there are, I feel like Altman and Wellman and Rousseau, like they would actually kind of like get along. They seem like they kind of get into the same concept where Altman and Wellman, they say that you don't have to have a democracy. That's not the title that you have to have, but you do have to have like some type of democratic togetherness where people choose not to be in a democracy. Like if there is a monarchy, then having the right to forego that monarchy is like a democratic thought in itself, like the way the people have to come together and all has to do. So I feel like Altman and Wellman and Rousseau kind of getting the same thing, where Rousseau might say you should have democracy, but moreover, he just wants everyone to have similar thought process about whatever's going on.
Huh, that's interesting. Yeah, I wonder if Altman and Wellman can say that to abolish the only way to abolish democracy as a self-determining group is to do it in a democratic way, like a referendum. Right? I'm not sure they can. I'm not sure they have any reason, because that still privileges democracy in some way, and I don't know why you'd privilege it that way. If non-democratic decision-making is consistent with self-determination over time, then apparently non-democratic decision-making is consistent with self-determination, period. Right? So if it's consistent with self-determination, period, then why would we require a democratic way of getting rid of democracy? You could get rid of democracy in a variety of other ways. Non-democratic ones too. Right? As long as somehow it can be seen as the group deciding its own on its own affairs, then,
How would they do it?
well, I don't know, right? You don't get told what
Sounds
I'm trying to.
because when you say a group deciding, it sounds democratic, you know? It's-
Right. Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I asked you to plow through all that Rousseau stuff, is because Rousseau gives you a good explanation of why you might think it sounds democratic, right? A group deciding on its own. In Rousseau, you get that at the purest form. It's this self-legislating idea of citizens giving the law to themselves. So, yeah, that's the thing that Altman and Wellman want to reject. They say, no, that's just... We tend to run these two ideas together, but they really come apart. We mix them up in our minds, but it's a mistake. So this chapter that we've read for today is really them trying to pull these two ideas apart, right? And say, like, here are a variety of arguments for why you really shouldn't confuse self-determination and democracy. They're two completely different things. And you can have one without the other. You can have a democracy that doesn't have a right to self-determination. When? Well, when it's violating human rights. Okay? And you can have a right to self-determination that isn't a democracy. Of course, you can have democracies without a right to self-determination and with things. And no, anyway, so they don't relate to each other necessarily for them. This is controversial, right? Like many people who think about self-determination think about it in some way in the tradition of Rousseau, even if they don't consider themselves Rousseauians. Democracy is usually thought to be at the heart. So they're going against. They're a minority view, right? That they're defending. They are going against the current. An iconoclastic. So we'll look at it. And we'll ask some questions. All right. So you've seen this right now, right? But at least there's a tension here, and we'll keep coming back to this. Well, if we think about what Altman and Wellman are doing and whether it makes sense, the threat, of course, is that they start with this idea about value individualism, right? So that everything that matters about self-determination has to be translatable in something that matters to individual people and their rights and their freedoms and their wills and so on, their interests. And the problem, of course, is that if you go away from democracy, that might start disappearing from view, like that minority that I was discussing a moment ago, like me, under the king. So there's some quotes, right? So again, you see this value individualism. The right to self-determination is violated. If that is violated, then the individuals, qua members of the political group, rather than the group itself, are wrong. So they don't want to say the group itself is wrong, because that would be collectivist talk. They don't want that. So who's wrong? Well, it's the people, the individuals, you, and me, right, as a group member. So if I live under a monarchy and some foreign power comes in and overthrows the monarchy and puts a democracy in its place, I am disrespected, right? It's not the society as a whole, but it's me who's being, it's me that's being wrong. And it's you that's being wrong. Every individual person is being wrong, because we as group members are not being respected. We're not allowed to settle our own affairs. Right, so it's entitled to dominion over itself regarding affairs. And here's a claim. This is the opposite about it, right? So it doesn't require democracy, but they do think that if a political group is organized well, then it can exercise such a will. And they talk about a rational will. The word rational comes earlier, a sentence earlier, so I put it in there. So that's very Rousseauian, right? The group can exercise a rational will. So it's not the rational will of you or me or the individual, it's the group's will. When they take on the task of establishing and operating institutions that perform the blah, blah, blah. So, a couple of points here, right? So here's self-determination. It's about groups exercising their own rational wills. That's the ordering of the own affairs, right? And the value then will be people living together as members, right, as individual members of these political groups, as long as they respect human rights. And so then you get the right to self-determination, putting that somewhat together. You get a violation of a group's control over its own affairs in a way that disrespects individuals in their capacity as members. That's the basic outline of the idea here. Yeah? All right? All right, so a couple of issues we're going to be talking about, 3 in particular. First, how is it possible, right, that groups as such, as a group, can have a rational will. One that's worth respecting without violating value individualism. Right? That goes back to how individuals are operating. So some questions about like where does this will come from, and how is it that if we violate the group's will that we're somehow disrespecting the individual members, even when they disagree with it. So you might want to overthrow this monarchy. Now the foreigner comes in and overthrows the monarchy. You get what you want, and somehow you're still being disrespected. Okay? Sounds mysterious. Now Altman and Wellman don't really explain, so I have an explanation for you. There's something. Here is it's a possibility, it's a theory about, or an argument about how groups might, this is the best case I can give you, right? I'm not sure if it works, but this is the best argument I can give you. So, oh wait, it's on the next slide. But anyway, I have an argument for why it's possible that a group could have a will or make a decision that's independent in some ways from the individuals that make up the group, yet based on it. We'll get to this. The most straightforward answer you might give is this one. That's the one from Dahl. And we'll see next time Philpott has a similar argument. And that's just basically saying the group's will is just the sum of the individual autonomous wills of the members. Right? So if we are a group here in the classroom and the group has a will, the group decides to stay in the classroom, or the group decides to go for a walk. What sense does that group make a decision? Well, the sense is it's just shorthand, right? Like it's just a summary for a much more complicated sentence, which is all of us individually decide together to go. But that's not what Altman and Wellman think. It's not that when the group, a state or country decides to do something, the USA elects Hillary Clinton, right? All right, so they say, okay, the group, America, has now decided to appoint her as the president. In what sense? Well, you might say, well, it's just you and you and you and you and you and me, all of us deciding to. No, that's not what's going on. That's what Dahl thinks, that's what Philpott thinks, but it's not what Altman and Wellman say. They say, here's why. So if a person autonomously chooses a certain outcome, then a decision must be causally related to the outcome of it. So they have a section on autonomy. They say, this is not what's going on. To say that it's your autonomy, you have to have some type of influence. So why don't we say that you autonomously decide that the world continues to spin around the sun? The Earth continues to spin around the sun. Why not? Well, because you have no influence over this, right? Let's say you decide otherwise. The world is going to stop spinning around the sun. Decide. Nothing happens, right? Still, there it goes. And so there's this sort of a test, right? If you have no causal influence on this whatsoever, your decision. No effect. You decide one thing, continue spinning world, okay, the world continues spinning. You decide another thing, don't continue spinning world, continue still there it goes, right? So you have no causal influence on this. Then they say, well, then you're not really autonomously choosing for the world, the Earth to spin around this only. It's just a thing that happens, and it's not your choice. Of course, something else is different, right? Like I might autonomously choose move from here to there, right? So let's see, I choose to go from here to there. Yeah, there goes my body, right? Yeah, I don't choose to go for, yeah, that's not moving, right? So now we have a test. I'm actually autonomously choosing to move or not move, and we could test this because there is a causal relation between my decision to move and my actually moving. So the argument is, if you're going to be saying that the will of a group is the result of the autonomous decisions of the individual members, then it has to be more like the decision to move from here to there than it is like the decision to stop the Earth from spinning around the sun. So it's not like the decision for me to move, because when I decide to move from here to here, it actually happens, right? And when I decide not to do it, it actually doesn't happen. I understand here. And so their test is, how about a democracy? Let's say that you decide to elect Hillary Clinton. Right? Does it happen? Well, maybe it happens. Let's say that it happens. It looks like it's going to happen. Now you decide not to elect Hillary Clinton. Does it still happen? Well, probably the exact same will happen, whether you decide to or not. Right? Or in the past. So. You voted for Obama 4 years ago. He got elected. Great. You did not vote for Obama. He still got elected. Right? You didn't have any effect on this. It wasn't you who elected him. If you change your vote in November, right, won't affect the actual outcome of the election. We talked about this before. The odds of you having an effect on how the election is going to play out are minuscule. If I were to write it out on this board, the blackboard is not long enough to write the 0 point, all the zeros that I need to get there. Yes, Altman and Wellman say that it's actually true. Well, that's actually true. Like, if you, this is not a theory. This, you can calculate this. Like, what the chances are that you as an individual might decide an election, and it's super, super small. So the chances of you deciding an election, I think I said this last time, but are smaller than you winning the Powerball lottery jackpot, which is, those chances are smaller than getting hit by lightning, right? So much, much better chance of getting hit by lightning than winning the Powerball, and you have a much better chance of winning Powerball than actually deciding an election by yourself. Because what you need is you need to have an absolute tie where your vote is the one, like if you choose Obama, if you choose Hillary, Hillary will get elected. If you choose Trump, Trump will get elected. To be in that position, we're never in that. It doesn't happen. Why? Not because it's impossible. It's possible. It's just the odds are so small. So, well, then the question becomes this. Can we say that when one or the other is decided, you as an individual citizen are autonomously deciding to elect that individual? Hillary or Trump? And their answer is no. Because your decisions, this is the second premise here, as an individual citizen, rarely if ever are actually causally related to what the state does. In this case, appoint one or the other as a president. But that's true for everything, right? The U.S. is involved in a military intervention in Syria right now. Who decided this? Any of us? No. Right? No effect on this. How might we know? Well, were you in favor of it? Yes. Okay, well, it happened. Were you against? Imagine that you were against it. It would still have happened. Right? So you have no causal effect, no causal influence over this. And if you have no causal influence over it, by the first premise, that means you're not autonomously choosing it. Right? And so then it follows here that democratic states' actions are rarely, if ever, the result of autonomous acts of individual citizens. And so the idea that the group has a will because the group will just is the individual wills of the autonomous citizens, that's not going to work because the group will is disconnected from the individual wills. Is this line of reasoning clear or not? Does anyone have any objections to it? You think any problems with this? Laura? Go on, Laura.
Well, I think it depends a lot on the size of the democracy as well, because when it comes to local elections, there would be a higher chance of you actually affecting the outcome. So I think it really just does depend on the size of things. Although it could also be argued within the United States during the presidential election, if everybody thought that their decision wouldn't cause any kind of outcome, then it would be a smaller amount of people, and then they would be able to affect the outcome. And so I just feel like there is some sort of influence that people do have over the things that happen. I mean, there are certain things that we don't have any say over, but something just seems a little off.
Okay, interesting. It seemed to me that you were saying two things. One was that maybe we're exaggerating how little of a chance we have to actually affect what government does. So that would be disputing the second premise here, right? Saying, well, actually, when we claim that you never have, that pretty much never have causal influence over what happens, that's too grim, right? And maybe, like you said, like on this municipal level or something, you can have more, maybe you can be an influence. But then the second thing you were saying, it seemed to me, was not about this, but about the first premise, right? Which is like, actually, we shouldn't just, this black and white idea of where you only have influence if you're the decider. Maybe that's the thing that you're opposing, right? So, and that could be enough even if we live in a big country, right? So if there is some sort of more diluted version of control influence, that will be enough to say that we're autonomously deciding as a people together. Then even if the numbers are big, that might, okay, well maybe they're big, but you still have that, I'm calling it diluted, that other kind of influence. Right? So that could even happen at the presidential level. Claudia,
Yeah, I was going to say that if, for example, everyone decided not to decide, or like to stay out of the vote and not vote, then it would have an influence.
Right.
So I think it's also like like how you get together and still decide as a group, what are we as a group going to do as a group, or like if you're more people, you have more influence than you have because of individual influence.
Yeah, so, okay, that's interesting. So, let's see where to begin. Well, let's begin at the beginning, right? So you say, well, if everybody else stayed at home, then I might have a chance to decide it. But of course, all men well, I'm going to say, yeah, but it never happens, right? Because all these people are showing up.
But the bigger the group is of people who decide to do one thing, the bigger their influence is, and then it comes back to actually individual wills getting into a group, and like that's why you have lobbyists, and that's why you have different parties, because you know that as an individual, maybe my own will alone doesn't do anything, but if I get together with other people who have the same will as I have, we can actually achieve something.
So let's see how this plays out. So in the presidential election, these are odd creatures, of course. So that's not really. I'm not quite sure how that works, right? Like so, if Clinton or Trump gets not even the most votes, you can win the presidency while losing the popular vote, right? You can lose Bush Jr. Right. Okay. So that's why I said it's an odd system, right? Because you have the electoral college. Well, think about a parliamentary democracy, right, where you just have parties getting seats in proportion to the number of votes that they get. So let's say Germany. So what's Germany? 80 million people or something? Let's say half of them show up for the election, right? That's probably a little less than actually show up. So 40 million. Actually, not 40 million, because 80 million includes children too. So now these societies are pretty old these days, so there's not that many children around. So let's say there's like 65 million people, a little more than half show up. So let's say that 35 million or so show up, right? 35 million show up. You said so like half of them vote for one party. There's several parties. So if half of them vote for one party, that's going to be the one that wins, right? So what is that? 17 and a half. Right? All right. So 17.5 million people vote for the Christian Democrats. So now we're back to you, right? So if it's 16,999,999 people, right? No, sorry, 17,400,999. 17.5 minus 1, right? Compared to 17.5 million. What's the difference?
Well, no, what I'm saying is not.
So asking about your influence. Right?
Well, yeah, but my influence is that I know that my influence is going to be bigger if I get together with a group of people and we decide that we all have the same will. That's why parties exist. That's why you actually have that. You all have a similar idea and a similar will, and you know that individually I can't change it. But if I get together with a group of people that's large enough, even just if it's just like some weird party, like we have a pirate party in Berlin. If a large enough group of people decided, well, we want to...
Actual pirates?
Well, no, they're not. Well, they're just called pirates. They're not here anymore, but like, if a group of people decides we want to have...
Berlin is landlocked, isn't it?
Berlin is weird. But
Yeah, it is weird.
No, but like if a group of people decides, okay, I know my will alone won't do it, but if I get together with this group of people here, and then we find more people who have the same will, then our individual wills can actually do something. That's it.
Right, good.
I have the confidence that alone I can't change it, but in a group, in a democracy, I can change it because I can get together with enough people who can then have a difference on the will.
Michael?
Yeah, but once you get all of those many people equally using it, it's still on your individual will. Once it gets such a large group of people, it just comes off.
That's true. It could then be that in the end I'm not. I anymore. Like, I don't think that what I got together is enough more on it what my will actually was. That could happen.
Yes, like the marginal person, like the economists talk about like the marginal cost of production of something. Basically means like the cost of production of the next thing, right? Like the next single unit. So like the marginal influence of of a person or a voter, so like the one extra voter added to this group or something, is very, very small. Right? And so, aha, say Altman and Wellman, right? Now I have you because I'm saying here in this first premise that you should have really pretty serious influence if we're going to say that the will of the group is just your autonomous wills combined. Right? Now, the thing I thought you were going for, so I was a little surprised that you backed off when Michael brought that up at that point, because I thought you were going for saying that this is a mistake, that the first premise is a mistake, just like Lowell was suggesting earlier. Just like that there is something, some other kind of influence that is captured when you come together with people in these parties or whatever is the appropriate political form. And exercise your wills together, that still scales up to a group will. In some sense that captures your individual autonomy or something. But it's not, because of what Michael was saying, right? It's not captured by saying that you have a deciding influence. But then we have to back up and say, yeah, of course the same thing would happen if I just never showed up. But that doesn't defeat my argument from autonomy. Because here's I have another theory. We should have to produce that theory. But, I think most people who believe in some form of the value of democracy and self-determination, I think like this is why I'm going for it. Like, I think there is something like that thinking going on. Lots of people think that when people combine and work together in politics, their wills join up in some way that is meaningful or expresses their or captures their autonomy or their wills or their individual decisions in some way. Even though, as individuals, they don't have any deciding influence. Not like moving, or not like where you go for holiday, or what you study in school, or just your daily autonomous decisions.
I mean, this is a pretty pessimistic view, because if everyone would go after this, nobody would go voting, and that's, the reason why many people don't go voting, because they say, well, it won't change if I not go vote, but like in the end, not going voting changes as much as going voting.
Right, not much.
Help the person you probably don't want to help. So that would lead people to say, well, if my individual will doesn't count, why would I participate in the democracy? Why should I?
Yeah, well, you might not like. It might be true, right? Even if even if you don't like the. I'm not sure. I'm hearing what's the word? What's the objection? Like if that's so. So yeah, I haven't voted. I haven't voted since I was 22 years old. So it's in part because I moved out of the country, but also in part because of these type of theories. I became convinced that it's probably a waste of my time. So.
But if everyone would do that, then we would end in like an anarchic kind of state, where there's self-determination. Okay, there is self-determination in saying, well, I'm not going to vote because that's my own decision. But then I don't know. It just doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, so if nobody else was showing up, I would actually start showing up, right? Because then I would not be a waste of my time anymore, because now I could actually decide and I could do all this good that because the world would conform to my theories, it would be much better. So, but they don't, right? All these people have these crazy ideas about about what voting is or how much influence they have, and so yeah, they're willing to waste their time, but then I'm not sure why I should start wasting mine as well.
But isn't the chance of maybe having that one, I don't know, whatever it is, a chance of actually changing the world better than not having that chance?
Well, sure, if it was for free, right? But it's like there's a cost associated with voting. I should study who I should vote. I should really read up on these people. I should take time out of my day that I could spend with my kid or clean the house or watch TV for that matter, right? Like all these are interesting and good things to do, and then fun things to do. And so, I give up on those things to go for something that's the chance of which is like, why don't I buy Powerball lottery, right? So the Powerball lottery. It'd be awesome to win however many millions there are. in the jackpot. Well, why don't I buy it? Because the chance is so small that it's not worth the couple of dollars that it costed to buy the ticket, right? So I can spend those dollars on something. So I do the same with my time, right? It's not free. Of course, if it was for free, it literally didn't take any energy or time. But I think it should take me time, and it definitely takes energy. So. Reggie, and I'll come to you.
Well, to her point, I believe, like she said, most people, well, I guess most people want to vote for the fact that they believe their rational will or their individual will will be, I guess, accepted, and everybody else will think the same like they do. That's why most people vote. But then another point she made as far as like if you join a group or if your will you got with another group of people with the same will you have, I was just sitting there thinking like, say like the NRA. If you join the NRA, you have a will that you have the right to bear arms. The NRA has lobbyists, like she said, that's in Washington, and they project their will on the greater good. I mean, even like when you have kids getting killed in Connecticut a while ago, the movie theater shooting and everything else, the will of the NRA and its supporters or its followers still has more power than, say, the popular will of the country. Because they have a group in Washington or wherever that's lobbying for them that's greater than people who are not lobbying for them. I put it in notes like that.
Sure.
So I'm sort of like you as far as voting. I mean, you know, you all want, like, everybody wants to, I guess, feel like their vote counts and everything matters. But I believe it's just a bigger giant in the room that's controlling more than what everybody else thinks. Like a monarchy, as you like to call it, or aristocracy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah. An additional thing for me is that I think if you're going to vote, you ought to do so responsibly. So you should do your homework, so to speak, right? So that raises the cost of voting. But, anyway, sorry, Anthony, and then.
You don't just have to vote for the president. You know, like you have the senators, and you have like everyone in the area that you can vote for as well. You know, those are the people that are actually going to have influence, and your votes can actually count. Like if you start a group and try to spread awareness about just the name of people, because like there's a lot of people that are running for government, and we don't even know the names. How many people are running for president right now? You only got the Democratic and Republicans, the people you think about. You got the independents that no one even knows. I'd be surprised if anyone knows almost any of their names. Like, I know you have the Green Party, and there's a woman, I don't know her name because she doesn't give any media coverage. So if people go to vote for president, of course your vote is going to have really any weight to it, and you're not going to really care about it because you only have two choices, and there's like millions of people voting, so you're not going to have much weight there.
Sydney, did you?
I don't know, I'm just a big hope person, and I believe in it, and I think as long as some type of number moves over your head, and until it reaches that zero, you as an individual can make a difference, can make a change. I mean, if everyone said like you know, I'm not going to matter, I don't affect it, so why am I going to do it, then we would have no evolution. There would be no change ever, because that one person didn't make that step and said, you know what, I'm going to be that person. It's going to change everything around me. Because like, you might not be the one person that does it, but you can be that building block that makes that big event, makes that big change. So it's just to sit and say, oh, I'm not going to do something because why does it matter? Just is what I feel keeps us in this constant loop.
Yeah, so I'm fine with all that, right? The question is like where and when are you going to matter? So you can't change everything all the time. There's only so many hours in a day and so many days in a lifetime. So, well, voting actually doesn't make any difference. So if I'm going to have my energy be actually changing something, I should expand it elsewhere. So actually, I think that argument strengthens what I'm doing. I think you should stop if you really want to change things, you should stop wasting your time.
I think the knowledge, the personal opinion away from philosophy, I think knowledge can change so many things. And, getting involved in those kind of things, watching all the debates, like, I went to the Hillary rally the other day, because I like to learn it, I like to know it, because that can, in the long run, make some type of difference, some type of change. You know, to say, oh, let's do this, I mean, I feel like everything connects in some way, shape, or form. So to know every little, not every little thing, but to know, you know, something from here, something from there, eventually will lead to something good, something that does matter.
Michael?
Did you say that you thought that your vote didn't matter? That it didn't matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that I have the right to vote matters a great deal, but my exercising it doesn't matter. Yeah. Whether or not I exercise it doesn't matter. I mean, yeah.
Right, then why should it matter whether or not you do?
No. So, well, the point was like earlier was that it's not for free, right? Like, so,
Oh, yeah.
if the argument is, well, you have a really, really small chance, but why not gamble? Right? You might.
Exactly.
Then the argument is, well, my response was, sure, but there's a cost to it, and I actually think that if I'm going to use it, if my vote is going to be decisive, it better be the right one, right? I don't want to vote for the wrong thing, because the effects are very, very serious and very widespread. So, okay, then I have to make sure that I know what I'm doing, and so if I'm really going to know what I'm doing, then I better do my homework. And so the cost of doing it well are actually pretty severe, I think. So, given that the chances of it actually mattering are super, super small, and the cost of doing it are pretty high, I think that if I'm going to do some good, I'd better do it elsewhere. I can learn about my neighborhood and how I can make that better, or spend time with my kid, or do my work, you know, like be nice to my family, something, my neighbors, clean up the yard, something. You know, there's all sorts of things that I can do that are good and help this world be just a little bit better, that are more effective, I think, than casting a vote at a ballot that's going to have zero, like literally zero effect. So that's the way I'm we're drifting a little bit off topic. But, yeah. Ryan.
What you, in premise 2, is trying to argue is that the only way for something to have to be relevant causally, if it is both a necessary and sufficient condition for something. And I think while not everyone here has voiced it, they've voiced things similar that have rejected that idea. Even in your example that you try to give where you would be, the necessary and sufficient condition is in like the equal tie, how
right.
unreasonable that would be. Well, it's like, no, it's still not right, but that's up to you. That was still split between every individual person, because had any one of those individuals changed their vote. So it's no more like, even in your example of like that impossibly rare case, even in that example, it's not the case that you have, that is solely in your hands, that power.
Sure.
It's still split. It's like a...
But it is true in that case that it's not up to me that the tie happens, that's for sure. But once a tie has happened, it's up to me which one gets elected.
That could have been applied to any of the individual people had they changed their vote. That election would have been swung in favor of that person's vote.
Right, so good. There is a theory of voting that this makes it even worse, right?
So you have no more power than any one of those individual people.
No, well, the idea would be like this, right? Like, so that the person who shows up last, right? So it actually matters not just that there is a tie and there's +1, but it's actually the order, like the sequence in which the votes are cast might matter. Right? So only if, not just the difference is a 1 vote difference, but it even has to be such a case that when the last person cast their vote, it's a tie, that it matters. Right? Because otherwise, that person themselves is not. So, but that makes it even more unlikely, because if the vote get cast in any other sequence, then you don't have that power.
I've understood it, but that's only the case. The reason why I don't think that even seems right is because that only makes sense if the last person, if you knew it, because then it's made a big deal. Right. But hadn't that last person not known they were the last person, then it's just just thrown into the pool.
Right.
And so only in the sense that you know it and there's that big drama is that a big deal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I think what we're finding, like this, you're bringing us back to where we should be going, not on my voting behavior or mal behavior or something. But mean, what you're drawing our attention to again is really the truth of this first premise, right? Like, I mean, so we're talking about not just autonomously choosing something, but autonomously choosing something as an individual in the sense that's relevant for group self-determination. Right? And you're saying, well, maybe if you take this literally, then this is such a demanding norm that it's just impossible to satisfy by anyone. And that's ridiculous, that it's just impossible in an election to have your will count. Because clearly some people's wills have to count for the election to mean anything. Well, okay, then we have a different... Okay, that's how I was hearing what you were saying, was saying, well, if that's the case, that even that last person who breaks the tie isn't really autonomously, their will is not really involved. Well, then that we have a crappy understanding of what it takes for your will to be involved. And we come up with a different understanding of autonomy or wills. Right? And I think that's what maybe I thought was what Claudia had in mind and Laurel maybe had in mind. Right? Because if we think, well, the only way we can say that your autonomy, your will, is related to the will of the choice of the group, is if you are the one who decides what the group does. That's like you're not really giving the argument its due, right? That's a caricature of a theory. That's not what people have in mind when they say these things, when they talk about self-determination. That's not what the intuition about democracy is about. It's not that you're the actual boss. The intuition about democracy is that we're all together making up our minds. So if that's the case, then, but that's a worry, right? This is an objection to the argument that Altman and Wellman are giving. Altman and Wellman are talking about the value of democracy and self-determination. Self-determination is a group choosing its own affairs. All right. Does that require democracy? Someone says yes. Why? Well, because the group's deciding its own affairs means that the individual wills of the members are together forming the group will. So that's why you need a democracy, because that involves at least potentially the wills of all people. And say, no, wrong, bad argument because of this, right? And the objection now is, well, okay, this argument might be valid, but you're misconstruing what we said. You're looking only at autonomy as this causally effective thing, the one when you're the one who flicks the switch, left or right. And that's not what we had in mind, right? We had a different theory in mind. I think that's an interesting objection, by the way. It probably is true that the people who talk and defend democracy have in mind a different idea. Of course, then you have to come up with a theory, right? Like you can't just say, well, that's not what I had in mind, and you have to just you can't defeat a bad candidate with no candidate, right? Like you have to produce your own candidate, in this case, a new theory. If it's not literally your autonomy, and they do talk about things like autonomy, you'll see it in Philpott. Philpott says, yeah, it's the autonomy of the individual citizens. So, at the very least, he's misspoken. So if that's not it, then we need a new theory. Right? In Rousseau, it was autonomy, because it was your actual, because you had a veto vote, so you actually were in the position to flip the switch for Rousseau. So if it's something else, then we now need to hear that theory. All right. So first, any questions about this? This, not me. Questionable me. All right. So if this fails, then we have to remain. Like the question remains: how can groups have a collective will that's connected to their members' wills in such a way that if the collective will is frustrated, the individuals are respected? That's a question for Altman and Wellman. Right? Because remember, if Altman and Wellman have to sort of walk this thin line too, they want to say, no, it's not Rousseau-style democracy, Philpott-style democracy that does it, that makes you self-determining. Yet, at the same time, the group can have a will of its own. But it's not the group that matters, it's the individuals that make up the group. Right? So they have to talk about something about how the group will is connected to the individuals, but it doesn't require democracy. So, here's what I said earlier when I went too fast. They don't give you an answer. They just don't. They just move on. I think they should have given you an answer, but they don't. Here's my best answer. This will take a little while, but we'll stop now. My best answer is you can show that it's possible or maybe necessary even for groups to have certain beliefs, desires, attitudes, a will, whatever, that is based on the individual wills, desires, attitudes, whatever, of members, but also independent of it. Again, that sounds weird. How can it be both based on and independent of it? But so here's how it goes. Here's a table. 3 people in this group. That's all you need. Minimum of 3. If there's more people, this argument becomes stronger, but if you have 3, that's the minimum. And there's 3 issues, A, B, and C. So let's say these are political issues. Right? The only thing we have to assume for a moment is that there's a logical connection between A, B, and C, such that if A and B are true, then you should also believe that C is true. So, like the premises and conclusion of an argument, right? If X, then Y, X, therefore Y. So, or more, let's give a concrete example, right? Let's say that you believe equality matters. You believe that? Yes or no? Right? Pick a side. Let's say you say yes, equality matters. B, to respect equality, we have to redistribute income in society. You might believe that. You might believe that equality matters, and not believe that to give equality its due, we have to redistribute. Well, maybe you believe that too. Now, if you believe that equality matters, and you believe that equality would require redistribution, then C, you should be in favor of some type of tax raise for the rich or something. Right? So you have 3 issues: equality matters, equality in like in redistribution, and then taxation. Right? And so you can take your stand. You can be in favor or against any of these. But, well, just how we stipulate in this example, if you believe that equality matters, and you believe that equality means redistribution, then, unless you want to be illogical, you should also be for this taxation. So far, so good? It's just, we could use any issue, right? But that's just the example I'm giving. All right. So, you can believe any of these things, right? You can believe yes, no on any of these matters, but if you believe yes and yes, then you should also believe yes. Right? Now, let's say that we just use a majority decision rule, right? Like this, imagine that it's a democracy, right? We just say, if 2 out of 3 people vote one way or another on an issue, then the group as a whole will vote that way. Right? If at least 2 people believe yes, then the group as a whole believes yes. Okay, so issue A, equality matters. Person 1 says yes, person 2 says no. It's okay. Let's say the group as a whole says yes. Equality requires redistribution. Person 1 says no, person 2 says yes, person 3 says yes. Okay, so the group as a whole says yes. And then, well, let's think about this. Okay, are we in favor of this taxation? Person 1 says no, person 2 says no, person 3 says yes. That would mean no, right? But notice now that the group is being irrational. Because the group thinks yes to A, yes to B, but no, in this case, to C, which is illogical. Right? That's a problem for the group, right? Because the group does not have logical will now. The group is being internally, as a group, we're being inconsistent. So if we're as a group of 3 people, we want to do something that's not just completely irrational and illogical, we cannot say that we as a group believe that the taxation shouldn't be accepted, it should be rejected, because we also believe that the things that mean that the taxation should be yes are true. So, notice, by the way, that nobody here is themselves being inconsistent, right? It's not that this inconsistency in the group arises because there's an inconsistency in the individuals. This person says yes, no, no, that's fine. This person says no, yes, no, that's fine. This person says yes, yes, and that person must then also say yes, and they actually do yes, right? So all these people are logically being completely fine, coherent themselves. But the group they form together has to be, if it's going to go with majority decision on every individual issue, so it says no, then the group is going to be internally inconsistent. So as a group, the 3 of us can't make up our minds, because we both believe that the answer should be no, but we also believe that the answer should be yes, because as a group we believe yes, yes, and we accept that A and B means C. Of course, we might say, well, okay, well, then we just change our minds, right? We just change the vote. We'll say, yes, as a group, we're in favor of the taxation because we're in favor of A, and we're in favor of B, equality and redistribution. But now we have a problem, right? Because there is a majority of us is against the taxation. And we also said we were going to let the majority decide. So now we're being inconsistent in the other way. Right? Because now if we say, as a group, we're in favor of the taxation, that's not true, because 2 out of the 3 are against it. So either way, we're kind of, like we're screwed here. Right? If we're just going to go, there's the logical relation and there's the majoritarian relation, and they cut against each other. All right. So how do you solve it, right? Well, we have to choose, right? We have to choose either to let the majority on the issue decide, and then it will be a no, or to let logic prevail, and then it will be a yes. So we decide that as a group. But let's say we pick one. We say, okay, we'll let logic prevail, we go yes. Doesn't matter which way we go. Let's say we say let logic prevail. Then as a group, we are deciding that the group will have a certain view, yes, that the majority of the individuals don't have. So the group has a view that's independent of what the majority of the individuals believes. So the group has a view that as a group it has, not the individuals, because the individuals are against it, but the group is in favor. So it's independent. It's based on it, right? Because this is only produced by adding up all the individual people's wills. But nevertheless, even though it's based on individual wills, it's independent of it. It has to be, because if we say yes, we're going against 2/3. If we go the other way, if we say no, of course, then same thing's still true, right? Like, as a group, we all of us individually accept the logical relation between A, B, and C. And then at the group level, we're going against that. So the group is doing something different from what the individuals might be doing. All right, so it turns out you can prove, mathematically you can prove, that this is possible as soon as you have 3 people, 3 issues, and there's a logical relation between the issues. Whatever decision making we're using. So we're using majoritarian here, so that looks democratic, right? But it's also true for non-democratic decision making. Actually, it's true for every form of decision making except a pure dictatorship, where we just say, person 1, you decide it. That's the only time you get out of this problem. So any type of sort of group aggregating of decisions, any type of group decision making, whether it's a majority, whether it's a qualified majority, whether it's a lottery type thing, like you're going to have this possibility arise. And so here's the point, right? So this shows that you can have the group making decisions and so be self-determining as a group in a way that is based on individual wills, but independent of those wills. And it doesn't require a democratic majoritarian decision making. You can do it either way, for any old decision making. Then if this is good enough for self-determination, then it follows that democracy is not required for self-determination. Because you can do it in a democratic way, but you can also do it in a non-democratic way. All you need is to have some way, democratic or not, where the group's decisions are based on the individual's decisions. Right. So it's pretty abstract, I realize. It's complicated, but that's the best argument I can construct. You don't have to, I don't expect you to memorize this or reproduce the argument I'm giving, but I'm giving you just the argument to illustrate how this type of group self-determination, a group will, might actually be possible. It's interesting, right? This is not just an abstract philosophical theory, right? Like this happens a lot. Like you can run into this in practice. The seminal paper is a paper by a legal philosopher called Louis Kornheiser, who came across this idea when he was thinking about how legal, like in the law, tribunals decide things. Because in the law you get this a lot, right? Like so you get, like say that the tribunal has to decide on a tort, right? So damages have occurred. The plaintiff is suing someone else to pay for the damages. Right? Should the damages be awarded? Well, it requires. So first, is a statute in the law satisfied by this case? Yes, right? Is the defendant, well, like was the defendant there or something? Yes or no? And then, okay, we should award damages or not. And so you get these cases, right? Like if the defendant was there and the statute actually applied, then yes, damages. And so you can have these tribunals in which there's 3 judges in which this happens. So they all accept that if the answer is yes, the statute applied, yes, the person was there, then yes, damages should be awarded. And they just take their opinions this way, right? So yes, no, 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 yes, no, yes, yes, yes. And then you get this inconsistency where 2 out of the 3 judges think that the statute applied. 2 out of the 3 judges think the defendant was there. And 2 out of the 3 judges think that still no tort should be required, should be paid. And now you don't know what to do. Because as a defendant or a plaintiff, you can say, the defendant is going to say, aha, a majority of the judges does not think that the tort should be awarded. So I don't have to pay. And then the plaintiff is going to say, aha, 2 out of the 3 think that the statute applied, and 2 out of the 3 think that I was there, that the defendant was there. And by law, if you believe that, you have to award the tort. You have to award the damages, pay up. And they'd both be right. The defendant is right to say, no, no, 2 out of the 3 are with me. And this plaintiff is right to say, no, no, 2 out of the 3 judges agree that the law requires damages. And so how are you going to solve this? Well, it's no simple answer. Right? You have to make a decision about which way to go. But that's possible. And if you're going to go one way, if you're going to say, well, we'll just let the majority of the judges decide on whether the damages should be awarded, or you say we'll let the majority of the judges decide on the legal elements of the case. Either way, we're saying that the tribunal is going to do something as a tribunal. Because either way, we're going to say that the tribunal is going to make a decision where a majority of the judges can object to it individually. And that's not going to be... ultimately, you're going to have to say if the decision is going to fly, it doesn't matter because the tribunal decides, not the individual judges. It's not just the individuals that are making the decision. It's the tribunal that makes it. So someone is going to have to suck it up. Someone's going to be happy at the end of the day. Anyway, the point here is just to show that it's possible for groups, tribunals, 3-person democracies, but by extension countries, right, to have group wills that are independent of the wills of their people. Just because you have to, right? Otherwise the group can't do anything. Or the group will do everything at the same time, including contradictory opinions. All right. Any questions about this? All right, well, we'll continue with this next week, or next time. So I hope to see you later this afternoon. Steiner.